From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. We begin in Chile, where after 4 weeks of protests against the neoliberal government of President Sebastián Piñera, the main parties on the left and right have signed an agreement on a referendum to change the constitution. A plebiscite on constitutional change has been approved for April 2020 and will ask citizens whether they want a new constitution and what level of involvement parliamentarians should have in the process. The call for a constituent assembly to change the current constitution, written in the era of the dictator Augusto Pinochet, has been one of the key demands of the Chilean people, who have been mobilizing against inequality and repression for 29 days.
It's a constitutional exit, aiming at bringing peace and social justice through democratic means. The parties that have signed are committing to peace, respect for human rights, and valid institutional democracy.
The political sectors that are present here are in agreement that for the first time Chileans are going to have a democratic constitution. And that's no coincidence. It's not simple the fact that we are here. It's necessity stemming from our mobilized society. This is the result of a people that have protested and obliged politicians to reach an agreement, because the political system that didn't listen to the people was unsustainable.
Millions of people have been protesting in the country to demand reforms and an overhaul of the dictatorship-era constitution, and have been met with heavy police repression. Protesters tried to protect themselves from rubber bullets with homemade shields during demonstrations. Water cannon vehicles also sprayed water at protesters in an attempt to disperse the large crowd. More than 26,000 people have been detained since the demonstrations began, according to figures from Chile's Supreme Court. A special meeting of the Political Council of the Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of Our America took place on Thursday night in Nicaragua. It was called in order to address the crisis in Bolivia following Sunday's coup d'etat, forcing President Evo Morales to seek asylum in Mexico. During the meeting, Bolivian Foreign Minister Diego Pari made it clear how the coup was being planned weeks before the election on October 20th.
Bolivian opposition, accompanied by civic leaders, police and unarmed armed forces, carried out a series of violent actions in recent weeks, which led to the forced resignation of President Evo Morales. With the passing of the days, we could see that the issue of electoral fraud and the second round, new elections, were just pretexts to lead towards a coup d'etat which should be prepared before the elections and was part of the agenda of the Bolivian far right. On the 4th of October, the right had already announced the possibility of fraud in the elections on the 20th.
Foreign Minister Pari also said that the OAS violated their accords with the Bolivian government, providing a political decision instead of a technical one, following an audit of the vote count.
At the request of the Bolivian government, an audit was carried out of the vote, but this was rejected by the opposition. They aimed for this audit by the OAS should be an audit of the verification of the voting records. However, the OAS, beyond the agreements, the written agreement between the Bolivian government and the OAS, extended its powers to take a political decision and not a technical decision.
The foreign minister of Venezuela also spoke during the session, pointing out the huge mobilizations that have taken place in Bolivia after the ousting of President Morales, and highlighting the hypocrisy of a number of governments that have recognized the self-appointed president.
We have seen a huge mobilizations of the indigenous people and other social movements. It's not just the movement towards socialism of Evo Morales, it's the people of Bolivia. Anyone who looks indigenous is mobilizing to defend their identity, their country, and their government. But we have also seen governments, US embassies, European Union, some of them formally recognizing with a complete disregard for any legal status, the same way they recognize the self-proclaimed president of Venezuela. But we trust completely in the Bolivian people, in the leadership of the Bolivian leaders, and we know this situation, with the help of the peoples of the Americas, with the help of this ALBA alliance, will return to constitutional channels as soon as possible.
And speaking during the closing of the ALBA meeting, Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega said former Bolivian President Evo Morales was a true believer of equality and that he led the country's economy to great success during his tenure.
And Evo was doing it very well. And the very natural and the very valuable natural resources like gas is in the hand of exploiters. Evo brought them back and made them national property, and that is how Bolivia had resources to combat poverty and bring prosperity to the people of Bolivia without making any difference between those who were and are still racist, were beneficiaries. They were beneficiaries of the government of Evo, and of course the originary people. And this is what the empire doesn't stand. That is what the capitalists can't stand. That the richness is spread with justice. They want all of the richness just for themselves. And that what does is to raise hate and start conspiring to see how to put an end with governments that maintain a democratic conduct. Because democracy is not just simply voting. Democracy is ensuring job, education, health to the working class, eradicate poverty. That is democracy. But to just manipulate numbers, the growth, wealth, they speak of billions and billions of developed countries. And in those developed countries, there's poverty, there's misery, and the richness, the wealth is concentrated in the hands of few. Therefore, there is no justice, there's no democracy. There is just the tyranny of the capitalism.
After the break, we take an in-depth look at the situation on the ground in Bolivia following the coup d'etat. Don't go away. Welcome back. On Thursday, the Senate of Bolivia sworn in Monica Eva Copa from the movement towards socialism as its new president in the midst of the coup d'etat.
We are living a difficult time, but we are going to be able to cope with it all. We must rid ourselves of radical positions. What our country is looking for right now is peace. I I'm in black because of my more fallen brothers in El Alto, for my fallen brothers in different places. The movement towards socialism does not want more death. We want peace. We want to work in democracy. We want to give the most immediate response to our country by going to a healthy choice, healthy and as fast as possible. And for them, I call on our brothers from the opposition, and if we have to stay day and night here, we will. Brothers, sisters, especially the people of El Alto, we are going to do this like this.
Thousands of demonstrators from the city of El Alto in Bolivia headed to the city of La Paz in rejection of the coup. The protesters are marching against the Senator Janine Áñez, who declared herself president after the coup, deposing President Morales on Sunday. So far, 10 people have reportedly been killed during repression of the demonstrations, 8 of whom died from bullet wounds. And the outrage against the coup in Bolivia's indigenous and poor communities has become much more organized. The MAS party spokesperson Gualberto Arispe said the party is calling for constant mobilizations and holds the repressive army and police aligned with the country's right wing and the coup leaders responsible for the deaths so far.
In the name of the movement towards socialism, political instrument for the sovereignty of the peoples, we are calling for permanent mobilizations with peaceful marches and roadblocks across Bolivian territory. We reject the civic, police and military coup d'etat. We condemn the unconstitutional self-declaration of Janine Áñez as president. As such, any action that she realizes is totally invalid. We are also calling for the incarceration of Generals Calimán and Calderón for violating the political constitution of the state and taking a political side. We hold the armed forces, the police, Luis Fernando Camacho, Carlos Mesa, and their criminal orders responsible for the deaths and injuries sustained until now. Cuarto, responsabilizamos a las Fuerzas Armadas.
Meanwhile, the United Nations General Secretary Antonio Guterres has expressed deep concern about the coup in Bolivia. He urged restraint from violence and told his personal envoy Jean Arnault to assist in providing a peaceful solution in the country. As the popular pressure against the coup steps up in Bolivia, so does repression. According to analysts, those responsible for the coup have failed to give it even a semblance of legality. Alejandro Kirka, correspondent, reports.
These are the poor neighborhoods in the affluent southern part of La Paz. Here, the women wear long, full skirts, bowler hats, and carry their children in shawls on their backs, the dress that identifies them as indigenous. And in Bolivia without Evo Morales, that is cause for persecution.
Do you know what they have done to women wearing these skirts? They have cut our hair, our pigtails, and turned off our skirts. It is Camacho who has done these things, and we are never going to forget that.
Right here, where Juana is talking, a young man was wounded on Monday. Nighttime in these barrios is full of terror.
They shot him in the leg, and he fell. They carried him away themselves, with blood pouring from his body.
That is why the ombudswoman is here.
In this area of Ovejuno, Pedregal and Chasquipamba, 3 people have been killed, 3 people shot dead, and many more wounded, and many arrested too. These are the results of the civilian military coup.
Everyone here has something important to say, but nobody is listening. They fear these abuses will go unpunished.
As indigenous people, we will not allow them to come back. Now we are getting organized. We are waking up. The Bolivian people today know that a woman in an indigenous skirt has the right to say what she thinks. As indigenous women, we have the right to enter a government office and be attended to. Before we weren't allowed in, or they made us take off our hats and sent us to the back. But now, thanks to an indigenous president, we all have the same rights.
This stairway leads to Los Rosales, where a funeral is taking place for Beltran Mamami, a 23-year-old worker murdered in a punishment raid.
No, mentira! No, it's a lie. They said he wasn't killed. He tripped over, but they shot him. We replied, he had bullet wounds. No, we didn't shoot him. They insisted. He fell over.
They grabbed my husband and me and took us to the 4th Regiment and beat us. A colonel grabbed me and kicked me 3 times. I am hurt here, all green from bruises. I am not laying. Look, and I am bruised on my back too. They had no mercy. They said we had burned the Poma buses, that we had burned their houses, and that we had to pay for that.
While this was going on, the police let loose on protesters in the center of La Paz, and the terror came from the skies too.
In other news, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean has downgraded its projections for economic growth in the region. Let's take a look at those numbers. It is forecasting an average expansion of 0.1% for 2019. Meanwhile, in 2020, the agency projects that the region will continue along a path of low growth with a 1.4% estimated growth in GDP. This would mean Latin America and the Caribbean will have had 7 years of low growth, which in turn has translated into worsening levels of average per capita income. The reduction in the pace of growth is affecting the majority of Latin American economies, 17 out of 20 countries. In other news, there is a growing problem of gender-based violence in Guyana, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago. So said a senior official of the UN Fund for Population Activities. He was speaking at the Nairobi Summit on International Conference on Population and Development. The director said there's a need for a different strategy to counter this practice, which has harmful and lasting consequences for victims, families, communities, and nations. Gender-based violence is one of 5 themes of the Nairobi Summit, which has been convened to mobilize the political will and financial commitments to fully implement an action program. Cuba has unveiled a memorial for late South African President Nelson Mandela to mark the historic ties between the two countries. Mandela famously praised the Cuban Revolution as an inspiration to all freedom-loving people and was a strong supporter of the late leader Fidel Castro. As president of Cuba, Castro gave the African National Congress military support in the 1960s. In the 70s and in the 80s, Cuba sent soldiers to fight in Angola, which weakened the government in South Africa and in turn helped Mandela's anti-apartheid fight. After his release from prison, Mandela traveled to Cuba in 1991, saying the writings of Ernesto Che Guevara served as an inspiration to him throughout his 20-year imprisonment.
Always, the South African people are very grateful to Cuba for all that Cuba does for us. And what's important to us is that at this park, which is the park of the founding fathers of the Organization of African Unity, South Africa has got 2 leaders. It's the leader Nelson Mandela that we unveiled his bust today, but we also have the bust of Oliver Tambo, the president of the ANC throughout the time when Nelson Mandela was in prison. So we are very grateful to the Cuban people for opening this park for us and asking again to unveil the bust of Nelson Mandela today. So thank you very much.
Still to come, we have the latest from Gaza after several Israeli bombings. Stay with us. Thank you for joining us again. A ceasefire between Israel and the Islamic struggle movement has come into effect, ending 2 days of intense Israeli attacks on the besieged Gaza Strip. The 2 days of airstrikes have left at least 34 Palestinians dead and dozens of others injured. The dead include 8 members of one family who were killed during an attack on the home of a man who the Israeli army claims is a senior official of the Islamic struggle movement. Local residents dispute those allegations and say Rasmi Abu Malous, who was killed alongside his wife and children, was a military police officer for the Palestinian Authority.
They are children, civilians, not militants, and they have nothing to do with politics. They are innocent people, asleep, and we were shocked by 4 rockets landing on the teen house. This is not normal.
This is a war crime. You are killing innocent children sleeping at home. They were supposed to fire warning missiles, but they were bombed directly.
Our correspondent, Lianet Cruz, has more.
La situación permanece volátil en la franja de Gaza a pesar de la
The situation remains volatile in Gaza Strip after the ceasefire and peace agreement that was reached by Palestinian Islamic Jihad group and the Israeli army. This agreement, which was made at 5:30 a.m. on Thursday, says that Palestinian groups must ensure a return to normality and maintaining calm during demonstration on the Great March of Return that take place every week, while Israel must stop shooting at defenseless Palestinians and stop target killings. This latter is a very controversial point since it was made condition for an end of hostility and laid down by the Islamic Jihad. However, Israel's high military command have denied they accept this condition, since they consider that target assassinations are an effective strategy that they will continue to implement. Within this context, the Palestinian Center for Human Rights have launched an investigation in Gaza on the extermination of an entire Palestinian family by Israel forces. Other Palestinian cities have shown solidarity with the residents of Gaza, who have suffered weekly attacks from the Israel side. In fact, there were 30 Palestinian youth who suffocated after breathing tear gas that was released by Israeli soldiers, according to the Red Crescent of Palestine.
That was a correspondent, Diana Cruz. And in African news, a 19-year-old was killed in Guinea during protests against President Alpha Conde, as the opposition believes he is attempting to extend his term in office. According to eyewitnesses, Alpha Souleme Diallo was caught up in the demonstrations and was shot in the chest by 2 policemen. On Thursday, protesters flooded the streets of the capital, a day after Conde confirmed that parliamentary elections will be held in February. At least 14 people have died since demonstrations erupted last month against changes to the constitution that many fear could allow Conde to seek a 3rd term in office.
The Guinean youth are protesting to prevent the foundations of the public to be broken to keep a man in power. We are not against him. We are against him remaining in beyond his term of office on 21 December 2020.
The movement is getting stronger and stronger. We're here for that, and everyone is motivated to go out and say no to Alpha Conde, to say no to the government, for the Guinean constitution. That's it. That's why we're here today.
Nigeria, Benin and Niger have agreed to set up a joint border patrol force to tackle smuggling in West Africa. Nigeria launched a partial border closure in August to tackle smuggling of rice and other goods. And last month, it confirmed that all trade via land borders had been halted indefinitely. The 3 ministers of those countries agreed that a joint border patrol team, comprising of naval, customs, immigration and security officials, would meet later in the month to promote intra-regional trade. The committee would also ensure people crossing the borders would display travel documents recognized by the Economic Community of West African States Regional Bloc.
The delegation of Benin and Niger appealed for the immediate reopening of the Nigerian borders. In conclusion, the 3 countries reaffirmed their commitment in enhancing economic integration.
And for our last story, police in South Africa have used force to remove asylum seekers who had camped outside the offices of the UN High Commission for Refugees in Pretoria. The group approached the UN agency asking that it helps them relocate to other countries due to xenophobia in South Africa, since that country was in September engulfed in a wave of violence that saw 12 people killed and dozens of foreign-owned businesses torched. And with that, we end our news brief. But remember, you can find all of our stories by checking our website, telesurenglish.net. And you can also join us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.
from here to